So, let us, after this introduction, move to Nigeria. We begin by talking about Nana Asma'u. Nana Asma'u lived at a time of transition in West Africa prior to the establishment of British colonial rule in the region, in the midst of warfare of the jihad of religious reform that was launched by her father, Sheikh Usman Danfodio. Now, this shows you sort of modern-day Nigeria, and see if I can use this little gadget. This is the area of Degel, where the Fodio family, just outside Sokoto, the rural area where the Fodio family settled. They had moved from Fututoro, Futujala, mostly Fututoro, this region eastward, and had settled in various places along the way. They were Fulani, Fulfulde speaking family. So, I'm instructed to raise the map. So, this gives you an idea of the caliphate. This is the area that I showed you just a minute ago, and you see Gobir, the opposition movement, and Sokoto was not yet established, but soon after the period of the jihad, right around this period, and by the mid-19th century, Sokoto was being developed as an established city. So like her father before her, Asma'u had been educated by women. The Shehu himself was educated by his grandmother and his mother, and Asma'u was as well. This indicates that women's involvement in basic education skills was not exceptional, but was very common among certain families of intellectuals. And by the way, Jean Boyd and I are finishing another volume on Nana Asma'u that brings it up to date, and in that volume we have 8 generations of women scholars being educated by other women and educating the subsequent generations. So this is not a little exceptional blip. This is a continuing pattern. We have indications of the generations prior to Asma'u in which women were very active as scholars. Asma'u's prodigious written output followed a pattern set by the Shehu and her brother Bello, and the Shehu's brother Abdullahi, and her husband Gidado. The Fodio family members commonly produced prose and poetry on theological, political, and pragmatic matters of the day. Her father wrote hundreds of prose works. Her brother Bello was also a prolific author. The intellectual exchange was not confined to their own community, but extended across the Sahara. Evidence exists of Asma'u being in communication with a male scholar in Mauritania, one El-Shinkati, which is such a common name that it was difficult to find anything more about his origins. But in his letter to her, which is included in this collected works, this volume of collected works, in which we have the translations and then the facsimiles at the back. In here, that letter from El-Shinkati in Mauritania praises her erudition and character. Asma'u is the author of 61 known poetic works on matters ranging from religion and politics to advice about women's roles in this newly formed and newly reformed section of northern Nigeria, the Caliphate. In addition to being in touch with other scholars on an international scale, she also taught local classes comprised of both men and women, and established this training program for extension teachers. This last activity was a template for what comes next. Now, I want to move on and talk about contemporary Yantaru, but before we do that, let's go through some of these slides. This is the tomb in the Hubare, the family compound in Sokoto. This is the tomb of the Shehu, her father, and this is her tomb. Obviously, I'm standing there by a concrete block wall because her tomb is on the other side of this wall, and it's quite unremarkable as Islamic tombs are, but what is remarkable about it is that it is under the same roof as the tomb of the Shehu, which is quite a place of honor. This is an example of one of her works, which has an acrostic down the side, so verily with every difficulty there is relief, the opening line to one of the surahs in the Quran, written in haste by her in response to her brother's comparably sized missive on the eve of a battle in which they heard the drums over the hill. So it was a time of great urgency, and they were concerned about how the battle was going to go. And she wrote very quickly, but in a very complicated form, a response to him, which is indicative of her artistic ability and her literary skill. This is a typical manuscript page, and here, unfortunately, are manuscript pages. This is from Morocco, but this was a manuscript that was brought to me in one of the libraries, in fact, the Royal Library in Rabat, and you can see that this problem with heat and insects and all destroying the manuscripts is a problem that we have that is comparable in Sokoto. So there are still manuscripts in the family home and in the libraries in northern Nigeria that have not been digitized, that have not been preserved, and probably have already been lost. We need more scholars to go and do more work. And we're hoping that some of those scholars will be women like these. This is at a post-secondary school, the Sokoto School of Nursing in 2002, and you notice the different forms of hijab. You have women on one side, young men on the other side. So that is one school. This is an example of different forms of hijab, and these are women who attended a lecture that I gave in September 2002 in Sokoto, and each of these women is herself a scholar. One's a doctoral student in history at the University of Sokoto, one is an elementary school teacher, one's a secondary school teacher, one is a radio broadcaster. They all are very active in public roles and very active in educating. This is Hajia Abba Bayero, who was my dear friend while I lived, is still my dear friend. She lives in Kano. She is the third wife of the Emir of Kano, and she is a qualified teacher, and by that I mean she completed her teacher training certificate. Although she has been in seclusion as a royal wife, she does teach women in the palace. She teaches children in the palace. She teaches literacy, numeracy, and has continued even though she's in seclusion. People come to her. The mountain will go to Muhammad. Muhammad will go to the mountain. Here is an example of a woman who's was a teacher in Fez, Morocco. The date is 1948. Very unusual time for a woman to be given her own school and neighborhood mosque in Fez, where she taught. I talked to her grown son, and he explained that, yes, indeed, she was the head teacher and hired other teachers. This is the mosque part of the school. This is the school itself, which still operates right in the heart of the Medina behind the cultural center. Now, these are examples of people who sort of go back and forth between the Sudan and the United States. And it's at this point that I want to begin talking about the contemporary Yantaru. Timbuktu's Sankore University was established as a regional center of learning in 1100 by Tuareg scholars in what is now Mali. That Sheikh Usman and Fodio's works are part of that Timbuktu collection, and they have also been found in collections in Cairo, attests to the Fodio family's notoriety across a wide swath of Africa's scholarly communities in the 19th century. In the last decades of the 20th century, American Muslim scholars with special interest in their ancestral connections to Africa studied with Timbuktu scholars and then returned to the U.S. to establish the Sankore Institute and then related communities in several parts of North America. The American Sankore Institute, which you can find online if you just Google just Google Sankore, S-A-N-K-O-R-E, Sankore Institute. You will see the website established in 1985 for the Sankore Institute of Islamic African Studies. When this Sankore Institute was established, the person, the sheikh who established it, who was himself from New England, as a matter of fact, and had studied Arabic and SOAS, spent a year in the Sudan, had digitized a number of Fodio family communities, was part of the Qadariya community, came back, settled in Pittsburgh, and as the head of that ummah, he felt it was important to establish this connection with the Qadariya community in northern Nigeria. It was a heritage connection, it was a religious connection, it was an educational connection. So